democracy. Hello, 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 everyone. I hope that we are all doing well. So, the stream has changed a little bit, but I don't think that it will take away from the stream as a whole. Um, as you can see, we have some new art that was incorporated into the stream, so that way I don't necessarily have to be physically on the screen, since a lot of the time, it's a little unnecessary, I would say. Maybe, I don't know. Um, but no, this is just very wonderful art that was made by Hellbent, who is a very wonderful artist who very graciously and I think very expertly made me a Wiggler that I will upload to Twitch soon enough. So then that way we can use it. This will be the new. This is me trying it out, right, as a new way of as a new way to see how the stream might evolve. So, turning off the music and everything, I just wanted to say, I wanted to just thank everybody that's here so far. I know that typically right now we would be watching a movie. Hello. Did Jelly like jam? Welcome in, welcome in. Oh, I love that cute little emote. Giddy Goose. That is so cute. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about today are looking at the interview on Democracy Now! Of Francesca Albanese, who is the special rapporteur on Palestine, because she recently published a report, and this report was so harrowing that I actually read it in one sitting, essentially. Like, that's how intense this report was. I don't know if I want to bring it out and actually read parts of it, but it's pretty bad. I mean, like, in terms of, like, what it's describing, right? And that's the reason why I'm like, I don't know if I should bring it out and, start reading it. But regardless, like I said, a very, very good report by Francesca Albanese. And like I said, recently published and presented to the General Assembly. Then we will be going into Ilan Pape. We won't watch the full interview, although I would like to. I don't intend for this to be necessarily a really long stream, but because I do want to have our community night, later. So we will be watching a movie in the Discord afterwards. I just also needed to stream, because I kind of haven't streamed in quite a bit, and so this is a good way to do so. So, as I was saying, we are going to begin with looking at the and we're also going to talk about Dia de los Muertos, which I hope is cool with everyone. I know right now I don't seem to have quite many people here right now, but it always changes up. So, okay, so now we can transition over, and I'm still trying to figure out like where to place my little wiggler, because I kind of like just started using it, right? So, also, if you'd like to support my research, as you well know, you can always go to fund the book here, right? The Violence Never Leaves You, which is actually very germane to my current research, as talking about the concept of ethnic cleansing. So again, if people feel like they would like to give something back to the stream, etc., you can always do so, either by going to Throne at !Throne, and then the link will show up, or it's in the pinned comment. So, starting with the interview.
Now, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Narmeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. Israel's deadly siege on northern Gaza has entered a 26th day. Earlier this week, the World Health Organization managed to deliver some medical supplies to the Gamal Adwan hospital, but earlier today, Israeli fighter jets bombed the hospital's third floor where the supplies were being stored. Meanwhile,
So just to sort of begin with that, right? One of the things that Francesca Albanese is actually going to get into is the fact that the state of Israel does indeed do what, and this is actually paragraph 18. They're numbered. So if you would like to look at the report yourself, I would be more than happy to send you a copy. It has so many footnotes. I almost was thrown aback. Pardon me. I was almost like completely just like it has like 321 footnotes. So it's quite a read. But essentially, just to talk about this really quickly. Yeah. So if you go in the Discord. If you're not already in the Discord, of course, then you can, then I'll post it there before we watch the movie or during when we watch the movie. So I'm quoting Francesca, who will speak in literally just like 10 seconds. Quote, Israel has continued the use of quote unquote medical shielding arguments to target healthcare facilities. According to the World Health Organization, in 300 days, 32 out of 36 hospitals were damaged, with 20 hospitals out of 70. Okay, good. Oh, good. Yeah, that's good. Then that's perfect. But just in case anybody else needed the link, 70 out of 119 primary healthcare centers are incapacitated. Oh, okay, awesome. Oh, yeah, Arun. Yeah, Arun's such a very, very knowledgeable person, and truly I respect the work that he does, particularly when discussing Sri Lanka and as well as, Pakistan and India too, and just combating casteism, etc. So in essence, like this, what they're discussing here, the fact that there was the destruction of medical supplies where they were being stored, was that the state of Israel essentially tried to say that, oh, well, they're using this to shield, right, like terrorists, essentially. And that isn't true, right? Like, in fact, the hospitals tend to be very good at, making sure that they don't have people that might endanger the rest of the people there. But, that doesn't really matter in Israel's eyes. So that's one of the big problems here when it comes to human rights. So anyway, moving on.
Al Jazeera reports Israeli forces are continuing to shell Beit Lahia, the scene of multiple massacres this week. On Wednesday, an Israeli attack on a market in Beit Lahia killed at least 10 Palestinians. Earlier in the week, Israel struck a 5-story residential building, killing at least 93 people.
Arun is the undefeated champion of being shouted out while he's not in chat. Oh, yeah, no, for sure. Like, yeah, everything is Hamas. Yeah, no, like, oh yeah, definitely. I'm trying to avoid. Maybe I should just skip forward to the interview. I think that might be best. But yes, please do make sure to let's just move on to Francesca Albanese and the drama apparently that's been happening. Okay.
From a UN-affiliated official hired to promote human rights, unquote. On Wednesday, Francesca Albanese spoke at the United Nations and responded to the U.S.
You are so not wrong, DJ. Like, literally, like every single thing, right? Oh, Haaretz. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, Haaretz is the official, like, newspaper of record of the state of Israel. Like, anybody that thinks that Haaretz is like, oh, the leftist newspaper is just like, I don't even know. Like, but I did, however, set the channel to give a warning, like an age restriction anyway. So, but yeah, thank you so much, Cyrator. It's good to see you. So also, soon enough, there's going to be a 3-minute ad break. If you'd like to get out of that ad break on Twitch, you can always do so by subscribing, or by subscribing using Amazon Prime to get out of the ads. Yeah, no worries. VTuber jump scare. Yeah. Hello, Cakey. Oh yeah, I'm trying this out because someone Hellbent made this for me, and I thought it was so cute that I thought, oh, I've seen people use this type of like little like emote on the screen, right? And I thought it might be cute to try it out, right? Yeah, it probably was that. Yeah, no worries. No, but you're right. Like, I have to be careful not to show like too much of anything. Yeah, the governments are not happy with Haaretz and they're cutting partnerships with them. Oof. Yeah, I know. I mean, if someone wants to draw, if someone knows how to do that, I have no idea how to do digital art at all. But
attacks.
I have the same shock that you have looking at how the United States is behaving in this context, in the context of the genocide that is
So, so this is Francesca Albanese. First, I just want to say, I love the how this textile has the kafia built in. That is so cool. I love this like really dark like charcoal with black kafia. I love that. Right now, I'm actually wearing the one that I recently got, the one that's red and white. Arun Brown? No, Arun Anau. Because I have the the black and white one, which is the traditional one, a gray and white one. I have my the one that's the colors of the flag of Palestine here, and then I have my all red one. And I don't know why. Okay. I draw adios. Oh, okay, nice. So notice that Francesca Albanese called it a genocide. Okay. It's important that she said this because for one, as a person that is a scholar in genocide and Holocaust studies, right? I literally, there are people, I'm not going to say who, but there are even streamers, right, that have been like, oh, it's not a genocide because blah 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 reason and yada yada yada, and it's just like, no, like literally the person whose job it is to be like know everything about Palestine and everything that's happening there literally is saying it. Like, we do not need the court's final ruling to determine whether or not it is. And in fact, that's one of the things she argues, is that that's actually arguing that is actually demonstrating that people do not understand how the Genocide Convention works. So everybody not necessarily to me directly, but to other people that I know that were trying to say, like it is an ongoing genocide, just know that you literally are showing that you don't know anything about the Genocide Convention. But anyway.
Unfolding in Gaza. I'm not surprised that they attack anyone who speaks to the facts that are frankly on our watch in Gaza, and they do that so so brutally, because they feel called out, because it's not that the United States is simply an observer. The United States is being an enabler in what Israel has been doing.
Now,
And see, this is why there are people, right, who do say, and I don't think that their concerns are, I don't think that the concerns of the people, and I know there are people that argue about this, and like I said, if you want to argue this in my Discord, please go to the politics channel. You can argue this there, because that's just not what I'm trying to get into. But the discussion of whether or not, the fact that the United States is not complicit only. It's an accomplice, right? It is essentially almost a co-belligerent in all but name. Means that, like, people often forget that, the other forces besides just the political ones are also things that they have to, protest against, that they also have to stand up against, right? Like it's not just Kamala, it's not just Donald, right? It's also the fact that the biggest boost in defense and aerospace stock, right, in recent history is occurring right now, right? Because they're just selling all of their stuff, right? I mean, that's what they're doing. So that's a thing to keep in mind. It's not the only thing, but also the fact that you have two countries, right? A vassal state, the state of Israel, and then the United States, right? The suzerain, essentially, of the state of Israel, going against, very flippantly, right, human rights, international humanitarian law, international law, right, is what, made someone once, in fact, I believe it was just yesterday, when we were in Discord VC with other people, right, discussing this idea that, like, does international law really matter, right? If it doesn't. Right now we have impunity, and my answer is always yes, right? Because having those structures, having that jurisprudence, having those things there, right, is necessary, because there will be a day, right, that justice will be served, right? And international humanitarian law has come out, and international laws come out on the side of the Palestinians, even back in 1940, like after Israel took over 88% of the, or 78% of the land, of historic Palestine, right? So even then, like, in fact, this is why it's the fact that, like, UNRWA, right? The reason why UNRWA even came to be is because they didn't want the International Refugee Organization, the IRO, to be. They wanted to be the organization that would help the Palestinian refugees, right? But the issue was, and Ben Gurion specifically, the first prime minister of Israel, specifically made it so that the IRO did not become the organization that would protect the rights and the right of return for the refugees, was because they were the ones that had helped Jewish people in the Holocaust, right, and in the aftermath. And he never wanted them to make a comparison between what was ongoing there, or what had gone in Eastern Europe, right, in the Ostland, to what was going on in Palestine. And that's one of the reasons why UNRWA even came to be in the first place, right? So it's like, even an institution that was meant to be, we will live long enough to see Netanyahu take. I mean, I don't even think it's that long. I honestly don't think it's that long. I think it seems impregnable, right? It seems difficult right now, but I don't think that that day is as far off as people think. But anyway, but that's just me having, again, we have to be, the principle of revolutionary optimism is one of those things that, we have to try to uphold at all times.
Was UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese speaking at the United Nations Wednesday. She joins us here in our studio. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Thanks so much for joining us. Well, before we get you to further respond to what the U.S. and...
By the way, I'm just going to put this out there. Like, if anybody wants to study, like, international relations or diplomacy, like anything like that, she teaches at Georgetown University. She's a professor there. So, I mean, I would highly recommend, like, if you want to get into some discipline that, like that, and you already want to go to a really good school like Georgetown, you wouldn't do wrong to try to, take a course with Francesca Albanese. But, again, at Georgetown.
Israel saying. Can you lay out the findings of your report?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I have to say that this report is the second I write on and I present to the United Nations on the topic of genocide. And it has been very reluctantly that I've taken on the responsibility to be the chronicler of an unfolding genocide in Gaza. In March this year, I concluded that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed at least 3 acts of genocide in Gaza, like killing members of the protected group Palestinians and inflicting severe bodily and mental harm and creating conditions of life that would lead to the destruction of the group. And the reason why I identified these were not just war crimes or crimes against humanity is because I identified an intent to destroy. And I understand that even in this country, people are quite confused about what is genocidal intent because it's not a motive. One can have many motives.
Yes, this is so true. And I have to say, yes, when there was that debate with Norman Finkelstein and Moeen Rabbani and Benny Morris and Mr. Wikipedia, right? One of the things that became very clear is that the conflation between intent and motive, right? Like when Finkelstein brings up gets sort of shouted at about the concept of mens rea, right? Which is, again, that your mind, right? Like rea being like, the fact that you already have this bad intent, right? Like in this case. So it's not about any specific outcome. It's the intent itself, right? That's the reason why, like when Norman was trying to parse that out, she's sort of corroborating that, right? That like the intent to do something and the specific harm that causes, right, are 2 separate things. But they're obviously related to one another, but they're not the same thing, right? And a lot of that gets lost, especially on Americans, because like people think that having a motive is intent as such, right? But technically, you can have motives to do anything. It doesn't mean that you have a specific intent to do any specific crime, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, or with any person, against any person, etc., right? So that's kind of the issue at hand here.
To commit a crime. And I understand genocide is a very insidious one and it's difficult to identify what's the motive, but this is not about the motives. The intent to commit genocide is the determination to destroy, which
exactly
is fully evident in especially in the Gaza Strip, as I identified as argued in March already. The reason why I continue to write about genocide, and in fact this report walks on the heels of the previous one, is in order to better explain the intent, especially state intent, because there is another misunderstanding that there should be a trial of the alleged perpetrators in order to attribute responsibility to a state. No, because not only you have had...
Yeah, like this is another thing too, where people think that, we can just blame Netanyahu, right? That like The Hague, right? That the International Criminal Court, that's all that needs to happen, right? You just have to put Binyamin, you just have to put Yoav, you just have to put, whomever, right? the Zaka people, I don't care. I think, to me, the Zaka people and all of the people that made up those lies about October 7th, they should also be, be put in the dock. But that's just my opinion, right? Because they obviously contributed to creating the conditions in which people would, right, with their sensationalist propaganda, to make it so that people would be willing to, dehumanize the Palestinians to such an extent that they would be willing to, forego, I guess, a lot of their. Oh, I mean, like, in my view, I would say that definitely you could make an argument of, like, the, like, Giora Island, right? Like, all of these like essentially everybody that's drawn, how there's, like, the general's plan that I think was drawn up by Giora Island, right? All of that stuff, like, they for sure, and like the Eisenkot, like the one who invented, quote unquote, the Dahia doctrine, like, all of those would have to be brought to the dock as well, right? Because it's like, I don't think, and again, I understand this, but from a purely international law perspective, I don't think that any specific, like, I don't think, like, once you get to, like, individual soldiers, you can do that. But with generals and military leaders, that's usually where you can, because they're issuing orders, right? They're issuing orders that are then propagated, right? That are then, so anybody that's giving orders to, and also the people that made it so that the two AI systems, right? I forget what the first one is called, but the second one is called Hey or Hello Daddy or something like that, right? Hi Daddy, because it was presumed. No. I know. I'm just, like, adding in that legal context because I know, like, some people might think that might be, like, a possibility, right? But, like, propagandists, right? Like the people in Ynet or in the Jerusalem Post or other things like that. I mean, like, there were newspaper, editors and owners that they were sentenced at Nuremberg, right? Because they materially contributed to, right, the what the Nazis did, right, historically. There is a case brought to the Australian courts for an Australian Israeli soldier for the IDF where they're seeking to prosecute him for the crime of genocide. It's an interesting one to watch if it doesn't get immediately thrown out. So see, that is where, that's actually something that Francesca actually does recommend, right? And that is because that's kind of really all one can do. And that is to say that in her recommendations, specifically talks about how, besides, and the language she uses is prominent individuals, right? Because that's the kind of standard that is used. But essentially, like, all returning dual citizens, right, who are now returning back to their home countries, right, that now they should support, and here I'm quoting, quote, support independent and thorough investigations of criminal conduct, including genocide and apartheid, including through the application of national courts of universal jurisdiction over those suspected of such criminal conduct, including all relevant ancillary offenses, right? And if you, DJ, believe you're already in the Discord, but if you want, I'm gonna post it there. But, like, that is one of her recommendations, that yes, that everybody that goes back has to be tried by their national court. And the reason why is because that's actually something they would have to do under the Genocide Convention of the United Nations. Right, like, that's actually a responsibility. You're not. Oh, okay. Here, let me put a link. And you're more than welcome to join.
Acts committed that should have been prevented in a rule of law, and as proclaimed a rule of law system like Israel, where there is the government, the parliament, the judiciary working as checks and balances. genocide has not only been not prevented, has been enabled through the various organs of the state. And I explain what has happened as of October 7, which has provided the opportunity to escalate violence, to build on the rage and on the fury of many Israelis, turning the soldiers into willful executioners, is that there was already a plan. Hatred. I mean, the Palestinians, like Ilan Pappe says, are victims not of war, but of a political ideology that has been unleashed.
Yes, and this is the reason why the idea that for some reason you should not, hello Vidingale, welcome in, thank you for the lurk, that the idea that now you shouldn't be able to use the term Zionist, or that the word Zionist is like, oh, it is by definition a conflation for like Jewish people. No, it's not. Literally, Zionism began first as an evangelical Christian ideology, and the majority of its adherents and its supporters are evangelical Christians. Like, the fact that they got some Jews to essentially work with them and to, live out their, weird, messianic fantasies, right? Doesn't take away from the fact that the vast majority of Zionists, one, are not Israelis, and two, are not Jews. It's Western European and American Christians. And yes, if you'd like to support my research, you can always go to my throne and try to help me get Monica's book here, The Injustice Never Leaves You, which is talking about, recently, and again, I'm very thankful to each and every one of you that does contribute. There was a book that was talking about the decade of betrayal, right? And I sort of talked about it on a previous stream, right? When the United States ethnically cleansed from the entire country, all 50 states, Mexican people, about around 2 million people, and that is a statistic from the U.S. Department of Labor. Like, they are the ones who said it's 2 million. Then you have another million in the 50s under Operation, I don't want to say the word because it's literally a racial slur against Mexicans, but during that operation, another million were also ethnically cleansed from the United States. And this book by Monica here that I would really appreciate having on hand for my research is one of those texts that actually talks about is instead of being like broader like the other one that I thankfully have received, focuses on specific instances of violence, mass violence against Mexican people in Texas, right? So, which name was wild? Oh, the violence will never leave you, or? Well, it's like one of the things is that Monica is talking about the fact that people still live with the trauma of this. Like this didn't stop. It still happened later on in the 80s, right? The name of the of the operation, but again, it's because I know the one, the U.S. operation from 53, or 54 actually. But the point being that yes, that one is of particular interest as well because the co-author of the book, and we went over this on that other stream, right? The co-author Richard. Ricky Ramirez, he actually never met his father because of that. And he never told anyone until he testified before the California Congress about that. He had never told anybody else that his father was one of the people that was forcefully expelled. And because of that, he never got to meet him, and and his father had already passed away. And so I remember that he cried. And also another thing too is when they wanted to set up a commission to not only commemorate but to also try to do some bring about some reparations, something, right, for the Mexican community. Arnold Schwarzenegger vetoed it. Both houses of Congress in California said it was okay, but like they both passed it, but he vetoed it, and I don't know if we'll ever get another like campaign of awareness to be able to even try to get that. All we have is a plaque that still uses the euphemism, which the euphemism is repatriation, which it isn't a repatriation, because most of the people sent to Mexico, right, forcefully expelled to Mexico, were U.S. born, U.S. citizens, etc. Oh, thank you so much, Thea. Thank you. Does any of the YouTube mods know how to YouTube mod? Otherwise, I will Google it. Oh, well, you have Narwhal. Narwhali's here, so. And also, Moenoap.
Palestinians have always been an unwanted encumbrance in the Israeli mindset because they are an obstacle, both as an identity and as legal status, to the realization of Greater Israel as a state for Jewish Israelis only.
Mm-hmm. So we'll go back to, because I do want to ask about the Israeli state institutions that you name and the branches of the Israeli state that have been involved in forming this state's intent. But if you could elaborate on the point that you make, the difference between intent and motive, and in particular what you say in the report about how it's critical to determine genocidal intent, quote, by way of inference. That's a different phrasing than one has heard in all of this conversation about genocide so far. If you explain what you mean by that and what such a determination makes possible. So rather than just looking at genocidal intent in other forms, what it means to infer genocidal intent.
So first of all, what constitutes genocide is established by Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which creates...
Do you ever get bots? I mean, I have gotten trolls before, I guess. Not so much bots. Like, I mean, my channel's so small that it's like, and I talk about history. Like, it's like I don't really talk about politics, right? So that's another thing. I notice bots show up in a lot of political channels, but I don't know. So yes, what is saying, what Francesca's saying here is that when it comes to the International Court of Justice, it doesn't determine intent, right, by way of, did they specifically say we are going to do X, right? No, they infer it based on all of the evidence, right, on all of the case, which is unique. Right, instead of trying to determine intent from, right, pieces of circumstantial evidence, etc., the court actually, the judges actually look at the entire case as a whole and say, could this have happened without intent, right? Essentially, and then look at where it was necessary for there to be intent for X to happen, for Y to happen, for Z to happen. And then say there was intent, right? Because, again, intent is not something established in one instance when it comes to the crime of genocide. It is something that is a holistic process. And that's another thing people don't understand, right? Like they want it like, oh, well, when did Netanyahu, where does it say in, when did the Knesset pass a bill that blah, blah, blah? It's like, no, it's not any Knesset bill that was passed after October 7th, although those are very relevant. It's everything since the founding of the State of Israel, right? It's everything since 2018, right? And since 2008, right? With the nation state bill, which said that only the Jewish people have the right to have a homeland in the historical lands of what they call Israel, right? Because then that means that it doesn't matter where you are on the like that means that is one of the like that law is like one of the is part of the set of laws called the basic laws that is their version, the Israeli version of a constitution, because they never actually made one. And so because of that, right, you have the issue that essentially, and one thing I also wanted to mention too is Arab Israelis, as they like to call them, but they're really just Palestinians, right? That remained and were able to get keep. Well, actually, a lot of times they were moved into new villages and stuff over time. But anyway, point being that they actually do not have the right to expand their towns, right? Like Nazareth, right, is like the Galilee is still quite Palestinian, right? As are other parts of the country Israel itself, right? But one of the things is that they were only allotted 3% of the land, right, where they could live, and 1% of that land is actually already already taken away because they have to have parks, they have to have, right, like the Israeli government did that. So that means on 2% of the land of what is now the state of Israel, on 2% of that land is where Arabs can live, where Arab Israelis, Palestinians can live, and they can't expand out of that, right? So like all of these things talking about how like, the Arab Israelis, they have equal rights and they have equal, no, they don't. No system that limits you to 2% of the land and doesn't let your towns grow naturally, right, is a democracy, right? Again, voting booths do not a democracy make, right? Mexico had a dictatorship. It does, but yet it still had people vote every 6 years, and yeah, like the person sitting in the eagle throne, as they call it, changed, but nothing else changed, right? Like, you know what I mean? And so that's one of those things that people have to keep in mind. So what's the toilet say? I'm a good troll. True. Hello, what is this about Andrew Tate beefing with coffee? Is he beefing with the... Oh, no, he's beefing with CoffeeZilla. With CoffeeZilla, yeah.
It's a twofold obligation for member states to prevent genocide, so genocide doesn't have to complete itself. When there is a
Exactly. As like when the ICJ said in the beginning, in January, right, and then later, and in March, when it came back with its decision, right, with its provisional measures, at that moment, the steps should have been done by other, countries, right, to ensure that Israel stopped whatever it was doing. That's technically what should have happened, right, under international law.
Manifestation of intent, even genocidal intent, there is already an obligation to intervene because the crime is unfolding. And then there is an obligation to punish. How the jurisprudence, especially after Rwanda and after former Yugoslavia, there have been cases both for criminal proceedings where individual perpetrators have been investigated and tried, and responsibility of the states litigated before the International Court of Justice. This is how the jurisprudence on genocide has developed, and the intent has been further elaborated upon what the Genocide Convention says. So, and while it might be difficult to have direct intent, meaning to have, it's difficult but not impossible, in fact, to have a state official say, yes, let's go and destroy everyone. Although I do believe that there is direct intent in this genocide in Gaza. But the court also established that genocide can be inferred from the scale of the attack on the people, the nature of the attack, the general conduct. And what it says is that normally there should be a holistic approach in order to identify intent, which is exactly what I've done. And indeed, this is why I proposed in this report what I called the triple lens approach. We need...
So, yeah, like... that is the way how the court is unique in determining genocidal intent, is that it does a holistic thing. It looks at the entire case and determines from that, right, whether or not intent can be shown to have existed, right? If it was like necessarily the case that it was necessary, necessarily the case that it was a part of the commission of all of these crimes, right? Because you have, one, the wholesale destruction of Gaza, where now it's already been deemed uninhabitable. Like literally, it looks like a moonscape at this point. You also have, the fact that the state of Israel, right, all of the things that the International Court of Justice told it to do, right, it essentially did not do, right? It never let in UN investigators to go into Gaza. It never, did that report. It never did any of that stuff. And in some, like in totality, right, like it might seem like, that this, doesn't matter as such. But technically speaking, that actually does count against Israel's case, because that means that they're showing that they keep doing all of these crimes under the Genocide Convention and not doing the steps, right, that they would need to do in order to prevent that. So then when they come and tell the ICC, right, oh, well, we can actually prosecute Netanyahu ourselves, what they've done in the ICJ shows that they can't, right? Because they can't even, stop from genocidal orders going from Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, Giora Island, etc., down to the average soldier, right? So that's where there's a huge rift, right, in terms of like determining the intent, right? If you're flouting the provisions, the temporary provisions of the International Court of Justice, then that goes against you both in the case at the ICJ and at the ICC. So
to look at the conduct, like at the totality of the conduct, and instead of studying with a microscope each and every crime, we need to look at the whole, against the totality of the people, the Palestinians as such, in the totality of the land that Israel has laid as its own by divine design.
No, absolutely. And then if you could, the other precedent you've just spoken about, of course, Rwanda and former Yugoslavia. Another case that you cite in the International Court of Justice is the Gambia versus Myanmar. So how is that comparable to what we see happening in Gaza? Why is that a relevant example and different from both Rwanda and former Yugoslavia?
Let me tell you what I see as the major differences in the case of Israel, because it's a very complex discussion. But in all 4 cases,
this is the thing, is like, this is why when I do talk about these topics, and I know that they're not cheerful subjects, right? I get it, but they still are necessary, right? Like, they still are things that we have to know about, right? And one of the things that really sticks out to me is that sometimes people try to honestly make it seem as though the fact that scholars of genocide studies, special rapporteurs, right, other UN officials, human rights officials, right, do take the time to investigate thoroughly and then put it through a holistic approach, right, and all of that stuff. They, for some reason, think that means that we are, like, unsure of our conclusions, right? But it's like, that's the process, right? Like, we have to show, that, that you have the warehousing of Palestinian, young men in West Bank military prisons, right? We have to show, we have to discuss all of these things, like, this cannot happen without this. This cannot happen without this. This cannot happen without this, in relationship to all of that, right? And so that's why I think it's interesting that Francesca actually does say, well, people don't understand, people don't, and she's not, I don't think she's trying to do it to be like, oh, you don't get it, right? Instead, she's trying to say it in the sense of like, I understand, right, that people might not know, right, how these things work, right? But let me give you an example, right? And in this case, they're going to talk about the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, right? Which again, like, I've had to like listen to the testimony of survivors of the Rwanda genocide. It's hard to do so, right? Like, it's not an easy thing, but they deserve someone, they deserve people who are willing to listen to them and to hear their testimony and to hear what happened and to record it and make sure that it is not relegated to a footnote of history, right? That just because the trials are over, everything's been resolved, right? No, that's not true, right? The camps where they held Tutsi people, right, are still there. I mean, in fact, they very much resemble social housing, which is what also brings up a lot of other questions, right? But anyway, besides the fact, like, that's why when I tell people, if you have a question about, when I'm discussing these things on stream, don't feel bad if you have to like DM me or at me in Discord or even ask it here. Like, that's totally fine. Like, you're not derailing. I don't really, like, if it's a question, it isn't derailing, right? Because you want clarification, and I want to make sure that you all understand. That's what's most important. Because I know that there are things that don't seem, that can seem very obtuse, right? And can seem very opaque. So, when that does happen, I want to like Francesca, who is instead like, I developed this 3-tier approach, right? So that way, people understand, in this sense, it's a genocide. In this sense, it's a genocide. In this sense, it's a genocide. So now, looking over all these 3 things, we can see that it is right. Because breaking down things is right, like big concepts, is very, very useful. So, hello, MIDI doctors.
A toxic combination of hatred.
Hello, Looney Tunes.
Ideological hatred, which has informed political doctrines. And this is true in all the various contexts we have mentioning. The other common element is that there is a combination of crimes. Forced displacement is not an act of genocide per se, but the jurisprudence says that it can contribute to corroborate the intent. But there again, mass killing or mass destruction of property, torture, and other crimes against a person, which translate into the infliction of physical and mental harm to the group, not individuals as such, but individuals as part of the group. These are common elements to all genocides.
And I'm so glad, like, I actually am glad that she is like breaking this down in the way that she is, because yes, like, this is another thing where like people that argue, right, with, oh, it's not, or whatever, they want to argue Israel's side, is that it's not about any individual person, right? It's not about when we're determining these things, right? Both me and as a historian, right? When I discuss what's going on, as well as everything, it's like these horrific things that have happened to Palestinians live on as as trauma that affects the community forevermore, right? Like Al-Nakba still affects those who were born, yesterday, right? And everything that's happened since October 7th will reverberate in the memories of the Palestinians for years, decades, if not centuries to come, right? And so that's why when people say like, oh, well, why don't, like, if we redress individual claims, right, that somehow that can like change the whole situation. No, 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 no. Right? It's the same thing with anything, even in the United States, right? Like when it comes to asking for when it comes to not even asking for, but for requiring, right, that reparations be paid to the descendants of former slaves, right? It's that the generational trauma of that, Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of those things also compounds the amount now, right? It's not just the 300 years under chattel slavery. It's also everything since then, right? And that's one of the things that people, but instead they want to make it an individual thing by saying, well, if we just make it about Benjamin Netanyahu and we make it just about Yahya Sinwar, or we make it just about like, oh, well, that they stopped abusing this one Palestinian at Sdet Deman, right? So it's okay now. No, it's not okay now. There were hundreds of religious Zionists that were literally like trying to break in to Sdet Deman, right? Because they were upset at the fact that they were going to try, right, for put them on criminal trial, right? The soldiers that did those things to those inmates, right? And so that also shows that the society has been whipped up into a state where they are willing to excuse, right, crimes against humanity, right, that do affect the rest of the group, right? And that's the reason why, even looking at historical events, right, like for example, the mass expulsion of Mexican people, is like there is a story that was told of a Mexican man who, so this is his daughter retelling or telling the story of her grandfather, that he would never leave his house without his passport in his like a shirt pocket. And the reason why is because of the mass expulsions, because if anybody got caught and couldn't immediately show that they were a US citizen, even if they were one, they would get put on the back of a truck and then sent to a rail yard to be put on trains to be sent to Mexico, right? So this fear, this paranoia, this mental anguish, right, as the mass deportations are happening, still affect even later generations, where there is no trust that could ever exist between Mexican people and La Migra. I mean, there shouldn't be, right? But even things like, county, like even local government, right, was willing to participate in the mass expulsion, right? So in a weird way, it's like Mexicans are very wary of government, but not in a libertarian sense, rather in the sense of the entire society, from the federal government down to the municipal government, was willing to work together to ensure that millions of people were expelled, right? And in that sense, right, we can say that does show intent, right? But anyway, so the grandfather, when he passed away, she said that she had to bury him with his passport in his pocket, because he literally would wear it. He literally would have it there every single day, because he was still frightened of the possibility that at any moment they would start saying mass deportations now, just like how they're saying right now, and that they would send him to Mexico, a country that he had never been to, right? So
what I find characteristic in this one is, first of all, this is not, the state of Israel is not Myanmar, and is not Rwanda 30 years ago. This is not war-torn former Yugoslavia. This is a state which has a separation of powers, different organs, as I said, checks and balances. And let me give you a specific example because you asked me to comment on the state functions. In January this year, the International Court of Justice issued a set of preliminary measures in the context of its identification before even looking at the merits of the case initiated by South Africa for Israel's alleged breach of the Genocide Convention, which identified the plausibility of risk for the rights protected, for the rights of the Palestinians protected under the Genocide Convention, which means plausibility, it's semantics, but it's plausibility that genocide might be committed against the Palestinians in Gaza. And the provisional measures included an obligation to investigate and prosecute the various cases of incitement, genocidal incitement that the court had already identified. And it mentions senior leaders of the Israeli state. Has there been any investigation? Has there been any prosecution? But I'm telling you more. The genocidal statements didn't resonate as shocking in the Israeli public, not only because there was a rage, an enormous rage and animosity, of course. I mean, this is understandable that the facts of October 7 were brutal and traumatized the people. But at the same time, hatred against the Palestinians and hate speech, it's not something that started on October 7. I do remember, and I do.
Yeah, like the people that want to act like history started on October 7th is just, like even when they're trying to do that like campaign, I guess, to say that like, oh, Dan Clancy or whatever, blah blah blah, a lot of it is sort of, it doesn't make sense on one level because of the fact that one, you do like in the sense that what was I trying to say? I think I might have lost that train of thought. But I guess what I was trying to get at, right, is that like people try to act as though somehow what happened on October 7th was this unique event, completely unprecedented in the entire world, right? And blah 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 blah, right? Like all of this stuff to then build up to, something to try to say that some, XYZ thing, right? But in reality, the reason why it's such a the reason why it's been, handled in the way it is because it's a colonized people, right, that live on occupied land, right? That's their land, occupied by, the state of Israel, where like 75% of the population of the Gaza Strip are, refugees, right? And the fact that they did, for a brief period, right, on October 7th, were able to not only escape the fence, right, and were able to outsmart the IDF and all of those things, right, but were able to, like, take over military bases and were able to, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't want to go into the specific details, but, like, if you look at all descriptions of colonial uprisings, right, that had similar effects, you see the exact same type of, maybe not the exact same type, but very, very similar forms of dehumanization of like the, like with Algeria, right, of trying to paint Algerians as being bloodthirsty, blah, 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 right, like all of these things, right, like because of the fact that there was success, right? When if they were wallowing away in squalor, right, the Israelis didn't have to talk about, oh, this is Hamas, that is Hamas. But as soon as they have, some kind of, uprising that questions the status quo that it had been able to hold, via its siege for 17 years, or however long it is, that's when it starts to create the narratives that it's been using to justify the wanton destruction of the entire strip, right? Like, and so that's what also needs to be taken into context as well, right? Is that this is not, devoid of a colonial basis, right? As like, that is part of the reason why the people that want to act as though there's a state and then a state to be, right, there, and that they both have somehow are on equal footing, right, and that therefore like, you can actually compare the actions of both on an equal playing field, does not actually work. Like, even under international law, that does not actually work. Like, Israel's only legal recourse is to stop everything it's doing in Gaza and to leave, literally take away all of the settlers out of the West Bank. That is its only legal recourse. Everything else would be breaking international law. And so as long as it keeps doing that, it is breaking international law day by day by day by day. Right? Same thing with the people that try to justify what the IDF did in Lebanon. You can't. That was an act of terrorism, right? Because state actors can commit terrorism too. The United States Armed Forces have done it, right? The Canadian Armed Forces have done it. Definitely the French, definitely the British, right? It's not just non-state actors. However, under international law, even non-state actors are bound to international customary law, for example, et cetera, right? So, like, the people that are, like, disputing this, quote unquote, right, debating it, I don't even consider it debate, or making videos about it, et cetera, they don't know, like, this right here. Like, they don't, like, you cannot compare the two things, nor can you begin to call one group this epithet simply because of, you know, the way in which they have resisted, right? Can you say that the actions themselves were horrifying and should not have happened? Like, any specific instance? Sure. Yeah, that's definitely something you can say. But the attacks but you cannot say that them trying to escape, right, the militarized wall around Gaza and trying to willing to essentially sacrifice their lives so that, you know, they would no longer be just wallowing in squalor, kind of like I said before, is part of something that did not start on October 7th, right? It starts 17 years ago with the blockade. It starts in 1967, right? During the June War. After the June War, it starts in December of 1947, when Israel began before any of the Arab state armies around it even stepped on the ground in what is now the state of Israel. So proving that it was never a defensive war, an existential war either in 1948, because it had already expelled the over half, right? The vast majority of Palestinians had already been ethnically cleansed from what is now the state of Israel before the Arab armies even began to fight back, before they even arrived, right, in March of 1948. So with that in mind, right, we have to take all of this with a far broader context than most people are willing to give the situation. And that's where so many problems arise. Especially people that think that their knowledge that they have been able to glean from whatever they have read so far, right, is on its own face authoritative, right? Like, there are so many critical conversations just within history that does genocide studies, let alone every other discipline that also works within genocide studies, of how we actually discuss, you know, any specific aspect of, especially things that have a colonial nature to them, which it has to be said, a lot of the 20th century genocides are due to a colonial nature. So because of that, right, like the naming of this as terrorist, or the naming of this as this, or the naming of that, like this is not the way how a historian in genocide just immediately starts to use it or takes it at face value, right? Because, for example, Ansar Allah, right, in Yemen, right, they have been put on the terrorist list and taken off of it by the United States, right? But they are more than willing to say, oh, well, that one kid, Rashid al-Haddad, he definitely is one. Although there is no proof that he is one, right? There is no proof that he is one. But they still are willing to, like Iago in Othello, right? Even if I know not for surety that it is true, I will prosecute as if it were true, right? That is what they are doing, right? And that is where people need to take several steps back, right? And really just remind themselves that this conflict is not 6,000 whatever. It's not as such. It's not an ancient conflict. It's not about religion as such, right? It's because of settler colonialism. Literally, that's the old, like, as soon as people start to say, oh, well, this goes back so long ago, thousands of years. No, it literally doesn't. Because Jews were already living there. There were Palestinian Jews until the Zionists came. So what happened? Zionism happened, which is a settler colonial venture. And that is the issue with a lot of these discussions, is that they will not actually recognize that. They want to act like Zionism means, the desire for a state, whatever that even means, right? No, they have to investigate it far more than that. Because again, Zionism did not begin in the Jewish world, so to speak. And when it did, it wasn't even where most Jews lived. It was in petit bourgeois or in bourgeois circles in the metropolises of places where the Jews had already been assimilated into general society, not where most Jews lived in the Russian Empire, where they had restrictions on where they could live, on what jobs they could do, etc., etc., etc. And like, again, people want to act like, oh, well, we don't, like, almost as if they don't need to consider that. Well, again, the whole idea of a nation state and it having to exist and it having to, blah, 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 all of that stuff does not come to the fore of public consciousness until you have the romantic nationalisms of the 19th century, right? Of something like Germany, right, when it unified, to become the Deutsches Reich, right, the German Empire, right, when you had the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and then the foundation of all these new countries, right, and also the unification of Italy, right, into one country under the House of Savoy, right? If you don't understand how nationalism works, particularly in the European cases, then you don't understand how Zionism works. Because the way in which settler colonialism works is intimately related with that. So, that is another major concern here. It's not recognizing that, yes, the people that already live in Israel, that were born there, no one has ever, the PLO has never, it has never been a question about whether Jews should be able to live in historical Palestine. It's about whether or not they should be settler colonizing the place and saying that this space is exclusive to them. That's the difference, because that's the colonial nature of it. So That is what has to be at the forefront of these conversations, not just, it's not 6,000 years old, right? And in fact, the Torah and the Tanakh, they give horrible descriptions of where the boundaries of the historic land, quote unquote, of Israel is. And we also know from archaeological evidence that there was never a united kingdom of Israel. So every time that it mentions Eretz Israel in the Tanakh, it's referring to a tiny fraction of the land that's there. Literally, the part that is by Zionist, religious Zionists, is called Shomron, or Samaria. But of course, Samaria is where the Samaritans live, right? And again, you also see this too in Israel's attitude towards literally the people who are the closest in almost every way to the Jewish people. The Samaritans. They have their own Torah. They had their own temple. They had everything, everything almost exactly the same. And yet they still discriminate against them. So it's not about, the proximity to Jewishness as such, right? It's about a particular kind of Jewishness, right? So, all of these things are sort of not addressed in a lot of the conversations. People just want to look at Benjamin Netanyahu. People just want to look at, they want to conflate Judaism and Zionism because it's becoming expedient for many people to do that, especially in a time and a place where anti-Palestinian, Islamophobic, anti-Arab sentiment is becoming, is having another one of its moments, especially after 9/11, right? Hello, the big room. Welcome in. Interesting tidbit. But in several countries, it's not illegal to escape from prison because a pursuit of freedom is viewed as a basic human right in those countries. So, I know this is going to be, this might be considered cringe, but whatever. So, technically speaking, if that is part of any treaty that Mexico has signed internationally, like any human rights treaty, right, that says that the pursuit of freedom, whatever, by Article 1, literally the first part of the Mexican Constitution, it says, in the United Mexican States, all of the peoples will enjoy the human rights recognized in this Constitution and in the international treaties of which the Mexican state is part of, such that these guarantees and their protection and their exercise cannot be restricted nor suspended, right? So, it's a very similar thing too. Or everyday people love to minimize the situation. This is the same thing it's been going on for thousands of years, right? Exactly. That's not true. I've heard that so many times since 10/7. Yeah, exactly. It's not true. It's not true. In the same way how Israel has never fought a defensive war. Israel has never fought a defensive war, right? People love to bring up the 6-Day War and say, Egypt was putting, Egypt has the right, as any country, to put its military wherever it wants, right? That is a fundamental right of any nation state. But the reason why Egypt even began to move its armed forces towards the border with Israel was because Israel was trying to invade Syria and had amassed its forces there. So literally it was trying to be there to protect, right? To be a counterweight to Israel's invasion of Syria. Because Israel has been trying to take as much of southern Syria as possible. Same thing with Lebanon. Since 82 and 2006, Israel, even under Ben Gurion, he wanted the Litani River to be the northern boundary of the future state of the then future state of Israel, right? So, yes, that's right. No evidence of a mass. Right. The only time Jews were only expelled out of the city of Jerusalem which if you've ever been to the old city of Jerusalem, and again, I've never been there, but Bezras Hashem, Palestine will be freed, speedily within our days, Bezras Hashem, and then I can go, but it's tiny, right? Like, if you look at the maps, they make it seem huge, but it's actually really tiny, right? Because, it's a walled city. It has to keep, people inside, right, for protection. That was the only city that Jews were, that there was any expulsion out of. Everything else, right, was migration. There was never an expulsion of the Jewish people from Syria, Palestina, or, Palestine, ever. And in fact, as I've mentioned before, already you had in Babylonia, right, a community going back 2,500 to almost 3,000 years of Jewish people that's actually the most densely populated Jewish area in the world at the time. So, in fact, it was in Babylonia where the exilarchs were, right? Like, where in Palestine you had the patriarchs that then went away. In Babylonia, right? In Babylon, you had the exilarchs that were still had power. So yes, there is no evidence of a mass exodus either. Neither in the Egyptian case, right, like that one, nor in the Roman expulsion either. So.
Remember the shock I felt because no one was reacting. And years ago, there were Israeli ministers talking freely of justifying the killing of Palestinian mothers and children because they would turn into terrorists.
Francesca Albanese, talk about the title of your report, Genocide as Colonial Erasure.
This is another element which I think, and in fact is the most important, where we see the difference between this genocide and others, because there is a settler colonial component. And again, if you look at what the International Court of Justice in July this year concluded when it decided that when it found that Israel's 57 years of occupation in Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem is unlawful and needs to be withdrawn totally and unconditionally as rapidly as possible, which the General Assembly says by September 2025, the court said that it amounts to that the colonies amount have led to a process of annexation and racial segregation and apartheid. And these are the features of settler colonialism: the taking of the land, the taking of the resources, displacing the local population and replacing it. This has been a feature. Now, it is in this context that we need to analyze what is happening today. And by the way, don't listen only to Francesca Albanese, listen to what these Israeli leaders and ministers are saying. Reoccupying Gaza, retaking Gaza, recolonizing Gaza, reconquesting Gaza. This is what they are saying. And there are settlers on expeditions, not only to Gaza, but also to Lebanon. So this is why I said that the main difference, the main feature of this genocide, apart all the horrible aspects of it, is that this is the first settler colonial genocide to be ever litigated before a court, an international court. And this is why coming to this country, which is a country birthed from a genocide, when I meet the Native Americans, for example, I feel the pain of these people. And I say, if we manage to build on the intersectionality of indigenous struggle.
Yes, everything yes to what Francesca says. The story of the Battle of Jericho reads really interestingly when you look at it through a colonialist lens. Yeah. But of course the exodus never happened. Like, they never. And also another thing too, the city of Jericho had no walls. So the whole they went around the walls blowing the trumpets and blah, 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 that never happened, because Jericho has never had any walls. Even though it's one of the oldest inhabited places on the planet, it's never had walls. So no walls, no Hagar, no blah, 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 none of that. But yes. But one of the things that is also, very fascinating about that is that it's a story that's created after the fact to sort of give justification for the internal conquest of one monotheistic Canaanite tribe over others, right? Because that's really, I mean, that's the reason why, like, usually when they refer to the land that they're going to, they don't refer to Eretz Israel, right? They refer to Eretz Canaan, because that's what it's called, the land of Canaan, right? And when they say, oh, the Canaanites, well, the peoples that would become the Jewish people are nothing else but a Canaanite tribe. Like, that's literally what they are. And we know this because the when you have the polytheistic stuff still existing, right? You mainly have it existing where, sort of like in other places where there's polytheism, right? Like in India, right, where certain places give more, will worship one deity more than the other, right? And that's why you see the collapse in Jewish religious texts, right, where you have Yah, El, etc., right, all becoming one, whereas before they were separate entities, right, in former Canaanite religion, right? So, but yes, from a colonialist lens, it is, because it's saying that, it's because, one, you already have, like a Malinche figure, right, which has always, or a Malintzin figure, which only until very recently has been a reviled figure in Mexico, right? Which is a figure that, that helped Hernan Cortés and would translate for him, and later, bore him children. But the way how people have tried to see her now is like, she literally was trying to survive, right? Like, she had no power. The only thing that made her useful and let her live was the fact that she was able to pick up Spanish quickly enough, right? And knew other languages to where then she could be exploited, right? Like, but that let her, yes, it caused, other stuff, but there has been a reappropriation of that figure, right? From like feminist Chicana scholars.
The cry for justice behind this case for Palestine will resonate.
And another thing too is, I'm so glad that you brought up indigenous peoples of the United States, because yes, like even that pain is still there. I mean, the reservations are not a solution for the indigenous peoples of the Americas, right? They were designed to be a place where the indigenous people could go and be forgotten by the colonial settlers of the United States. That is their purpose, right? That is why they have very little access to amenities, to to all of these other things that seem very basic to anyone living in a major city like me and here in LA. But in, for example, the Navajo Nation, which spans like 4 different states, it's huge. They only have one company. They literally have a monopoly running every grocery and they only have like 17 of them total, or maybe less. Maybe it's 7. I don't remember the exact number. It's 7 or 17 or 10 maybe. I don't know. It's one of those. But they're all one store, and that's it. So if that store were to ever go under, there goes the entire grocery store, business from the Navajo Nation. Otherwise, they have to drive out of the reservation, and then have to, you know what I mean? Like, it's not actually a solution, right? Because then, what the United States does is that then it actually makes people have to define themselves as indigenous via blood logic, right? Via blood quantum. Like, oh, are you actually this? Well, instead of it being determined as it was determined culturally before, now we have to do it using race science, right? There are many of these critiques that have been brought up by various scholars about that. So, yeah.
Even louder, because it will somewhat be an act of atonement from the settler colonial endeavor which has sprouted out of Europe toward indigenous people. So there is a lot of symbolism behind it.
And, the analogy, first of all, you talked about the case brought by South Africa, so that what they share, apart from South Africa and Israel, Palestine, is both the fact that they were colonial settler states, as well as the fact that apartheid has been established as having occurred in both places. Now, in the case of South Africa, it was a decision that was taken by the United Nations at the time.
Oh, yeah, here's another thing, because are the companies we use not allowed in the Navajo Nation, or is it the choice of the Navajo? Oh, no, it's just that it's, from what I understand, right, like there essentially was like like a contract, right, that was done, right, because obviously they obviously what they do have, right, they want to protect, right, the Navajo Nation, that is. And so they were going to line up to have different providers, but instead they got one company that said, well, I believe that they're like headquartered locally too, so like that also makes it seem quote unquote better, but it's still a corporation, right? Like it's not like, oh, mom and pop grocery store, right? And essentially that like they signed over these land grants, essentially, so that way they could build the stores, and they just became that one store, and essentially they have a monopoly because of that contractual agreement, and a lot of that has to do with like the politics within the reservation, right, which is something that that here is a limitation of my knowledge on all of that. I like, once we start going into like the internal politics of like any indigenous reservation, but typically the leaders of specific reservations are usually in a lot of cases seen in a negative light, because they tend to be, well, in the case of the Navajo Nation, be like very evangelical Christian, right? So they don't want to promote like traditional beliefs as much. Two, and this is because there's a wonderful scholar at one of the institutions I work at that spoke to me about this. And two, want to essentially like make everything as capitalistic as possible, right? It's like, sell everything, sell all of these plots of land, that instead of it being for like preservation of nature, whatever, it's like, oh, why don't we just sell it to, why don't we just sell it to, I don't know, like to make like a mega McDonald's, I don't know, just like essentially nothing to like, not using the money that they do earn, right, via like casinos, etc., so as to benefit the Navajo people as a whole, or Dene as they call themselves, but instead, enrich themselves, etc., etc. But again, I only know very lightly. I will say this is one of my limitations, where I know I have no expertise. I am as much of a neophyte as anybody else. So. Yeah. It's still a corporation at the end of the day.
Time of apartheid was unseating South Africa from the General Assembly. There have been calls now to do the same with Israel. So if you could comment on that, and I just want to quote another short sentence from your report, in which you say, as the world watches the first live-streamed settler colonial genocide, only justice can heal the wounds that political expedience has allowed to fester. So
that's actually a really good sentence, because like, again, many of us, right, because I don't want to presuppose anybody's age here, right, because perhaps there are people that saw what happened in Algeria, or what happened in other places in the world where there were settler colonies that essentially came to their end. But this is indeed the like the stuff that the United States was doing in the 19th century, right? Manifest Destiny, all of that bullshit, right? It's not dissimilar from what we're seeing here, right? The only difference is the fact that now you have an Air Force, right? And you have, all of this technology, but the actions are the same. The justifications are the same. I mean, remember what the Spaniards would do to justify their attacking indigenous people, right? So as to conquer more land. Like the Catholic monarchs, as they're called, and the Pope said, well, since they haven't heard the word of Christ, you can't attack, right? Indigenous peoples who have not heard the word, who have not had a chance to consider, right, whether or not they want to convert, Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, thank you so much, Narwhal. Thank you so much for the 500 bits. Thank you. Yay, we even hit our goal. Oh my goodness. Yay, we reached our goal. Yes, big hearts. Thank you so much, Narwhal. I appreciate that. And so what this effectively means is that what we're witnessing is the Spanish, what they would do is they essentially came up with this little document, right, of introducing, quote unquote, the indigenous people to Christianity, right? Like they would say something and it was in Spanish, right? But obviously the indigenous people didn't speak Spanish, so they didn't know what was being said. And so when they didn't respond to their question, like, "Oh, do you want to be baptized right now?" right? And they're like, they don't know what they're talking about. Then they would say, "Oh, see, they have rejected Christianity," and then they would begin attacking those indigenous peoples, right? And then in the United States, I mean, this is why the calling of any specific person terrorist, right, when there is no evidence that they ever committed any such acts, right? It's just this vague, then you are literally playing into colonialist, racist, right? Islamophobic, right, thought processes, right? Because you're not actually considering that the person that you're looking at is just a regular person, right? Instead, you are calling them something that puts a target on their back, right? And as a marginalized person, right, like a Palestinian in Gaza, right? They use that title, that epithet, I should say, so much that in a way it's lost its meaning. But also in a way, it's proven that people are willing to believe the idea that someone is something because a state actor says it, right? But state actors can be terrorists too. I mean, remember that the United States wanted to declare, and at one point wanted to declare all of the Iranian armed forces a terrorist organization, right? Because under its own laws, right, that meant that it could go and, quote unquote, fight terror and, attack the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and say, oh, well, they're all terrorists, but they are not, right? They are part of a formal military of a state actor, right? And then you have another case again of Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, right, where you have them being placed on the terrorist list and then them being taken off of it, right? There are people that are saying, oh, saying stuff that when they were off that list, that they were doing terrorism. No, technically, according to the United States, they weren't. right? They weren't. Apparently, they weren't doing that. So this is why this whole like, oh, we have to call. You cannot place these terms on people as if somehow they are eternal labels, because when you do that, right, especially without any evidence that any person is part of a group that does such acts, or that person in particular has committed such acts, all you're doing is just buying into overtly racist, Islamophobic, et cetera, right? Like things you should not be doing, right? You should like, people should want to complicate what they think about Israel and Palestine and Yemen and Iran and Lebanon, right? But instead they want to flatten it as much as possible, right? Like it's like it's like with Ansar Allah. It's a Shia militant organization, Zaidi Shia, right? It everything functions on a clan structure, which means you can tell who's Sunni and who's Shia by their surname and where they're from. And they don't take in people that are Sunni, because the whole point is that they don't want to live in a country, right? And this was a similar thing in Iraq, right, where Sunnis controlled the government, but the majority of the population is Shia, right? They don't want that to happen again in Yemen, right? It's the same thing in Bahrain. The crown, right? The royals that rule the kingdom are Sunni, but the rest of the island, everybody, all of the average citizens are all Shia, right? So for them to allow in people who are from border provinces with, where the government faction, the recognized government faction is etc. I don't want to get too deep in this, but my point being that, like, it's amazing how people that, seem to be willing to take a step back and really think about things before it comes to determining whether or not to use any specific epithet, like that, somehow don't care when it comes to Palestinians, right? It's already recognized in law, international law, Article 51 of the UN Charter, right, and upheld by the ICJ advisory opinion from July, from June, I should say, that Palestinians have the right to armed self-defense and resistance against the occupying power, because Israel is breaking international law by not fulfilling its duties as an occupying power. And instead you have David Friedman over here, right, the former ambassador, right, to the under Trump, right, to like when they moved the embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, saying that what they should do in Palestine, right, in the occupied West Bank, is, and I kid you not, he literally used this as his example, was to make it so that it's essentially like Puerto Rico. It's part of the state of Israel, but they can't vote. This is why understanding it as a colonial problem is necessary, because they just said the quiet part out loud about Puerto Rico, right? Puerto Rico that has so many people, the vast majority, wishing to become a state, right? They just said something that essentially says, we will never give them statehood, because the last thing we want them to do is to vote. Because of his own example, by saying we should turn Area A, the Bantustans in the West Bank, into Puerto Rico. And that's all you need to know. My fave piece of Caribbean indigenous resistance is the Hatwe Cuban hero. Hatwe, Cuban hero born in Haiti before being burned at the stake, he was asked if he wanted to accept Christ and go to heaven. He asked the priest if there were people like him in heaven. When he said yes, he said, "I'd rather burn in hell than live another day with you." Yeah, no, I mean, those are, yeah.
If you could talk about the International Criminal Justice Court of Justice's case in that context, what role you think they can play, South Africa's case, in resolving or addressing, seeing and addressing this wound?
First of all, let me unpack the question of the unseating Israel, because this is one of the recommendations I made in my report under Article 6 of the UN Charter.
Israel, yes, I fully back this. Israel should be like South Africa, the other like apartheid South Africa, be expelled, unseated from the United Nations. They are breaking both the Convention Against Apartheid and Genocide. They should not be able to sit in the Concert of Nations as if they should be given that respect. They themselves have lost that respect. They have evacuated the respect for that. So they should be expelled from the United Nations. And I'm so glad to know that she did put that using Article 6 of the UN Convention, because yes, they did it to South Africa, and Israel should not. In my opinion, Israel should be taken out. Palestine should be fully recognized as a state. I'm done with this. Oh, well, Israel and Palestine have to do it. That is always just a code for we want the United States saying this when they say, oh, we should just leave it to Palestine and Israel to. It's just a way of saying Israel can do whatever the fuck they want. No. If the UN General Assembly had no problem partitioning Palestine in 1947, then I would think, right, that having Palestine as just an observer member should sound as farcical to them, right, to the rest of the members as it should to the Palestinians themselves. They should be given a seat at the table, so to speak. A seat that they should have always had since, and a seat that they not only deserve for multiple reasons, but that the United Nations also would have to try to repair, right, via reparations from the colonial powers of the time that tried to get this all through with the state of Israel, right, that even began to draw lines on Palestine to steal the land from the people, right? That never should have been done in the first place. Nobody had any right to draw a line and say, this is going to be for the Palestinians, this is going to be for non-Palestinians, right? No one had any right to do that. Definitely not the United Nations. If one party says yes and the other says no, you don't do it regardless. So there is a lot that the United Nations would have to do to make sure that Palestine is able to not only have the right of return enshrined, because it is a fundamental right under Resolution 194, but that Israel has to accept that as well. That if the Palestinians who are refugees all around the world, if they want to move back to their former villages, their homes, etc., they have the right to do that. Nothing should stop that. And even there has even been resolutions where even the United States agreed with that. So no more of this bullshit. one state. In fact, at one point, under the Truman administration, but it was an election year. Under the Truman administration, they actually suggested a one-state solution. So I say, one-state solution, equal rights for everyone, right of return for all of the Palestinian refugees. And also the reparations commission for the complicit countries that have allowed for this colonial genocide to occur on their watch. The British, the Americans, etc., etc. Even though there's no amount, I think, that will ever make up for everything that has occurred. I don't believe that there is. However, that does not mean that the United States should not be paying something. If it can pay to have more military might than like the next 50 countries combined at this point, I think that reparations to both people within the country and outside of it, right, that they have directly harmed via their colonialist imperialist ventures, is justified, in my opinion, in my lowly opinion. Yeah. Oh, now they have agency. Yeah.
A member state can be suspended of its credentials, of its membership by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the UN Security Council. And
that's the rub right there. That's the rub. By recommendation of the Security Council. That is where the UK and the United States are going to try to step on that.
The first criticism
Chat aerobic workout challenge? Oh my god.
I got is that we cannot do that because every state commit international law violations. Absolutely. But there are two striking features here. First, Israel is quite unique in maintaining an unlawful occupation, which has deemed such by, in at least one full occasion, but again, there was already a case brought before the ICJ in 2004. So there have been two ICJ advisory opinions. There is a pending case for genocide. There has been the violations of hundreds of resolutions on Israel, occupied Palestinian territory, by the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and steady violation of international humanitarian law, human rights law, the Apartheid Convention, the Genocide Convention. So this is quite unique. But all the more, this year,
look, if there was any other country that had racked up even a quarter of these things, they would have been expelled from the UN long ago. I mean, imagine, like, the Convention on Apartheid. You are in violation of that. And you're still just, like, allowed to, have your, your flamboyant ambassadors go in there and just, like, say bullshit all day. Like, my God.
Israel has conducted an unprecedented attack against the United Nations.
Hi, FLFNF.
Physically, through artillery, weapons, bombs, UN premises. 70% of UNRWA offices on UNRWA buildings, clinics, distribution centers have been hit and shelled by the Israeli army. 230 UN staff members have been killed by Israel in Gaza alone. UN peacekeepers in Lebanon have been attacked. And this doesn't even take into account the smear, the defamation against senior UN officials, the declaration of the Secretary General as persona non grata, the referring to the General...
Yeah, that too. The State of Israel telling the Secretary General of the United Nations that they are a persona non grata in the country. Oh, so if you don't want the leader of the United Nations in your country, then the United Nations doesn't have to do anything. I think Israel should also be taken off of the SWIFT payment system. I think all of the sanctions that have been placed on all other belligerent countries, like Russia, like Iran, right, who have done far less in comparison, with perhaps the exception of Russia doing its, on terms of scale, right? But definitely not when it comes to genocide, etc., right? All of that stuff, right? I don't see why Israel isn't taken off of the SWIFT banking thing. Literally, there should be no flights. It should be completely a pariah. If the United States wants to be literally the only country in the world sending its stuff, then that's for the United States to decide. But nobody else should be compelled to act like they are a legitimate country anymore. Right? They have crossed that threshold many times over, right? To the point where you can say this is a rogue state on such a magnitude that to hear people defend it and try to act like it is a democracy, like it is all of these things that it pretends to be, only proves that it's not more. Yeah. It also makes sense because Israel is the more isolationable. Oh, yeah, of course. It has no real economy. Literally, if you were to cut it, like I remember reading in a report that Israel literally could not last 24 hours without, iPhones or whatever, right? Like essentially, it is a Western, late capitalism, consumerist economy. That's what it is, right? As soon as you remove the access of like the SWIFT payment system, as soon as you remove remove its ability to access the internet cables, all of that stuff, in an instant they would just give up because there's literally nothing that they could do. Nothing.
Assembly as a cloak of anti-Semites. Again, this has mounted to a level, the hubris against the United Nations and international law has been unchecked and unbounded forever. But now, especially after the Knesset passed a law outlawing UNRWA, declaring UNRWA a terrorist organization.
Thank you for lurking, DJ. Yeah, declaring UNRWA literally runs schools, runs food kitchens, it even ran restrooms, like porta potties, right? And there still weren't enough for the thousands of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Like I remember earlier in during this genocide that there were 2 bathrooms for 135,000 people in one of the UNRWA schools. Just 2. Can you imagine that? And yet people still deferred to allow women and girls to go use the restroom first. Even with all that, 135,000 people, 2 restrooms. I know people that live on their own with 1 restroom and it's too little. You know what I mean? Like, let alone a porta potty, right? But it's, and again, like now you have polio, right? Like, and of course it's just like, oh yes, we're doing a vaccination campaign. I would be scared. I have to be quite honest with you. If the IDF is like, oh yeah, okay, we are going to start giving out vaccines, I would be scared to get that vaccine if I were a Palestinian. Unless UNRWA is going to give it to me, I am not going to trust anybody from the IDF to inject anything inside of me. That's just a fact. Like I have historically based reasons why, and I can cite chapter verse why. Okay. Chapter verse why I wouldn't take a vaccine from an IDF soldier ever. But regardless, you have all of these skin diseases that have not been seen in some cases even in over a century in that part of the world. because the conditions are so miserable. They are beyond miserable. I mean, we are talking about people living in tents, right? With no protection from really the elements, right? Thankfully, right now, it's not the rainy season, but it's about to be. And I know this because it was just the Jewish day that winter begins, right? Because in Judaism there's summer and winter, right? And the prayers are slightly different. Winter is in essence the rainy season. So now I know that Gaza, like last winter, right? It's going to cause other problems, right? The overflow of the ruined sewage areas, right? All of that stuff is just, and people are more exposed to everything than they were a year ago. Like it's already going to be the second winter under these conditions, and now more people are living in tents than back then because so much of Gaza has been destroyed, where it's literally uninhabitable now. So, hello, narcolepsy. I might be a clean freak, but this is one of those most horrifying things I've heard about the situation. Yeah. Did the financial crunch hit them extra hard?
Therefore,
I don't think that Israel was affected that. Fascists never announce that they are fascists. They announce that the anti-fascists are terrorists. Right, exactly. And again, the Palestinians have a right to receive help in their self-defense, according to Article 51 of the UN Convention, right? So Hezbollah is providing that. The Ansar Allah, which claims to be, right, and is seen by some as the legitimate government in the areas that it controls, right? Also is, trying to provide, and I mean, some people say that it's like an embargo or it's blockade, didn't work. But again, the only thing it seems to have done is just allow for people to literally call, anybody associated with that country that had any notoriety and, express whatever to immediately be called that when, we live it in the entire core. Oh yeah, historically based. Yeah, I still love the little duck. That one's or the little goose. And yes, if you'd like to help me with my research, right now I'm trying to get this book. Hello, Cat Pig. Welcome in. Trying to get this book here, The Violence Never Leaves You by Monica. Well, I shouldn't just say her first name. But anyway, this book is talking about actually the tactics of violence used during the ethnic cleansing of Mexicans from the United States. So, again, if you'd like to contribute in some way, I always recommend people go to my throne and try to help me there, if you can.
enabling it from its capacity to
And also, if you'd like to help me in a more stable, a consistent way, my Patreon is also a good place to do that.
to deliver aid and assistance, especially in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This is the nail in the coffin of the UN Charter, and it can also contribute to that sense of colonial erasure. Because here, it's not just at stake the function of a UN body, and UNRWA is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, so it's even more serious. But there is the capacity of UNRWA to deliver humanitarian aid in a desperate situation, and also the fact that UNRWA is seen by Israel as the symbol of Palestinian identity, especially the Palestinian refugees. So there is an attempt to erase Palestinianness, including by hitting UNRWA.
I want to ask you about your trip
And not only that, but remember that UNRWA also makes sure that the Palestinians that are in refugee camps outside of, right, the West Bank and Gaza, that they are registered, that they, that we know that, every child that's born is registered, that they all have, all of that stuff. So again, the attacks that they've already done to the archives of Gaza, right, to the universities of Gaza, all of this other stuff is now to attack the offices of UNRWA, right, which now they can do in their minds, which they, would also destroy a lot of those records as well. So again, it's the destruction of the history, like that is what's very important to remember. It's like, not only is it the people themselves, but also the fact that those people even existed in the first place, right? That's what's so terrifying as well, is that it embodies something which Judith Butler actually talks about. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, thank you so much, October. Wow, 15 months. It's so good to see you. And perfect, just in time to see the little bats and everything. Just wait until you see my next screen when I go back to chatting. It's a Sanrio screen. Erase any and all traces of them. Exactly. Good of you. Yes, so cute. Yes. I decided to try it out. The people, the building, the history. I wouldn't be surprised if... Well, the settlers in the West Bank are burning the olive trees. That is true. Like, in fact, the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, is known for trying to Europeanize Israel by getting rid of olive trees, some of which are like 1,000 years old, and then they will say like, oh, we're trying to, we're ecological and blah blah blah, and then they literally will put pine, like Northern European pine and cypress trees. And in a weird way, it's like, because they try to make it look like Europe, that actually is what makes Palestine now have wildfires all of the time. Because those trees aren't native. They're literally invasive species. Same thing with sabra. Like, sabra literally means a type of cactus, right? But that cactus is not native to the Middle East. Sabra is a Mexican nopal, like the kind that we eat, I mean, I like my mom grows nopales, right, in the backyard, in the back garden of my parents' house. It's a Mexican thing, like the picture of like the eagle standing on the cactus eating the snake, the quintessential Mexican scene. That's the cactus that they brought over to Palestine, right? Because they thought that they could use it in different, essentially to use it as a kind of like delineating thing. Like, oh, we'll just put a row of these cactuses, right, like along this way, and then it'll make like a wall of, spikes, essentially. Because actually, there were Mexican TikTokers as well as other social media people that were actually showing Khazans who for whom, like, again, it's an invasive species, so it grows all over the place because there's nothing, it has no natural enemies, right? It has nothing to which the fact that the Israelis chose that to be their way of saying an Israeli born in Israel, quote unquote, as Ethan Klein likes to say, I think says a lot about the Israelis, because it's literally an invasive species. And, not from there. It's Mexican nopales, which, just thought you should know. And it's funny, too, because there are people in Mexico, like people from Zacatecas, right, and other parts of Mexico, where they call themselves, right, like they even have a saying, right, to like say like, oh, like, we know that you're from like the rural parts of Mexico because you tienes el nopal por la frente. Sorry, Literally, you have the Sabra in your face, right? That's as an insult, right? To say that, like, oh, we essentially that you're like a country bumpkin, right? Except for the fact that nopal is from Mexico. Like, you know what I mean? Sabra is not from Israel. Like the plant itself, right? It's from Mexico. It's nopal. So the whole thing about, I don't like Sabra hummus, and I have every right not to like it. It actually was fun. It actually was founded in White Plains, New York. You can look it up yourself. It was founded by some, I forget what's the company, but the company was actually in New York. And also another thing too is it's not in everybody's fridge. Like, I don't know why anybody like the people that I've seen that like Sabra hummus also are the ones that like dessert hummus, which is no. Already did, but olive trees in Europe too. Yeah, they are. But the reason why they want to get rid of here, I'll switch it over right now. The reason why you don't have oh, see, I'm glad you like it. Because I thought it would be nice to have, like, like this type of... Thank you. It's kind of crappy. Yeah, it's really bad. It's really bad. Yes, they do. And they also feed the IDF, and they do that. I'm all for Sabra slander, but don't come from my dessert hummus. No. I'm saying, like, okay, look. Okay. There are some people that I legit have seen make, like, you can look at the YouTube videos, and even there, the people are like, what are you doing? Because they literally put, like, Oreo cookies, like, with tahini. You know what I mean? Like that's a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm talking about. Because I know that, like, Boar's Head has their, like, oh, it has like some chocolate on the top or whatever. That's a whole different discussion. I'm talking about that, because I'm talking about the ones where they're putting Oreos up in the food processor. Didn't even know dessert hummus is a thing. Yeah, it is a thing. But it's reasonable to say that for typical European, olive brings associations of Italy and Greece, right? Of the Mediterranean in general, right? But the reason why the JNF gets rid of these olive trees, is because then they can say that, well, see, this Palestinian isn't using the land. Therefore, we can claim it now. Right? And then take over it. And that's what a lot of the religious Zionist settlers will do. Right? Like, they will go, like, burn the fields and then say, oh, well, see, now they aren't farmers anymore, right? Because they stopped farming, right? I mean, it's really messed up, but it's, any bean spread, sweet or salty, I will devour. Okay, so, like, ooh, so, like the kind they have around, like, when they have the, like, spring, like the spring moon festival, right? The, like, red, red bean paste. That's good. Which I'm sure they have done, but continually to do. Yeah, and then that's completely a lie. Palestine already is very green, right? And in fact, there's actually a famous town, famous dessert. I'll come for the dessert hummus. I maybe it's good, but I can't imagine it. Again, if people want to have this discussion in Discord, I'm more than happy to, just don't bring out the, fisticuffs. But, Mediterranean is too brown for Israelis. They want to recreate the English forest. I mean, I'm not joking when I say that Tel Aviv, right, was modeled after like the English Garden City, right? Which there actually is like multiple garden cities like that. So yes, and of course Tel Aviv used to be called the White City because of its Bauhaus architecture, which they purposefully painted all white, right? My first exposure to hummus is Sabra hummus, since it's all they have where I'm at. But homemade hummus is better. Yeah. Yes, and please, sadly, yeah. The White City, yeah. That is literally what it used to be called, the White City. Good point. The things written in respectable media about European, Mediterranean, mostly Italy, Greece, are just nauseating. Oh my gosh. I know what you mean, because the way how America thinks about like Italy and Greece is nothing at all like what Italy and Greece are like. You know what I mean? It's like just I don't know what country you're describing, but you've obviously never been there. Like, I don't know. It really sucks to see things otherwise, like Bauhaus being used as yeah, like I like Bauhaus architecture, right? But you know what's really interesting though is that the Israelis use it for to hype up their state in the beginning, right? But now, like they've completely let it rot away. So it's and now it's other stuff, right? Now there's just like everything looks like a strip mall now. It's gotten less bad since the Euro crisis was abated, right? Let's see here. Yeah, like I've never really I'm not a fan of like chocolate. Like, well, one, I don't like sweet things in general. Like, it doesn't mean I won't ever eat desserts. It just means that like I usually save like I have very specific things that I like and that I will eat those, right? Like, for example, I don't know if people have ever heard of halo halo. It's like a Filipino dessert, but it's really good. And it's like, I will have halo halo, but I'm not going to have like, like some, like candied onions or something. I don't know.
Here, as we begin to wrap up, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, tweeted on Tuesday, as UN Special Rapporteur Albanese visits New York, I want to reiterate the U.S. belief she's unfit for her role. The United Nations should not tolerate anti-Semitism from a UN-affiliated official hired to promote human rights.
So this is the ambassador of the United States to the UN. I think, to me, this is very unprofessional. And this is not the U.S. belief. I don't believe this. Nor do I think anybody else that lives in the United States in my chat believe this. But, of course, she's, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield knows what we actually think, right? Francesca Albanese is an expert in international law. Like, this is something that, like, literally, again, I've said before, if you would like to study like this stuff from like the international relations or diplomacy, or even like directly like the legal side of things, I would like, literally, she works at Georgetown University. Like, that's where she's an academic there, and she is known for her publications. And she is known for her scholarship. It's very good. So for them to come out and say this, and worse, to call it anti-Semitism, when the 321 citations on there showcase that all of the evidence that she has is literally based on what the court has shown and also what Israel itself has said, including specific people, like the Prime Minister, like Yoav Gallant, the Defense Minister, like the Minister for essentially the colonies, right, of the West Bank, Bezalel Smotrich, etc., etc. Like, she is direct quoting them. So for them to call it anti, is just unbelievably disgusting.
You can further address their charge of anti-Semitism against you and talk about what happened. You were supposed to come to Congress and speak and brief them, but that...
Right. Albanese is not. I mean, she makes a whole point of like making sure to say that like not even discussing the idea of Israel as a Jewish state, which I think actually, to me, saying that it is one kind of actually sounds like anti-Semitism, but I don't know. That's just my opinion. Like Zionists wanting to grant this the idea of the nation state a Jewish character is weird. I'll just put it like that. I will at least say it's weird. It's weird in a way that I kind of can't just let go. Oops, sorry.
was canceled this week.
Yes, it was cancelled, but let me. First of all, I'm very embarrassed to read this because a senior U.S. official who writes this, I mean, it shows a little bit of desperation. I'm sorry, but this, I'm very candid. And let me unpack my anti-Semitism for the audience. So what I've been accused, the reason why I've been accused of anti-Semitism is because I've allegedly compared the Jews to the Nazis. Never done, never done. What I've said, what I've done is saying, and I keep on saying, that history is repeating itself. I've never done such a comparison. Where I draw the parallel is on the behavior of member states who have the legal and moral obligation to prevent atrocities, including an unfolding genocide. In the past, they have done nothing until the end of the Second World War to prevent the genocide of the Jews and the Roma and Sinti. And they've done nothing to prevent the genocide of the Bosnians. And they've done nothing to prevent the genocide of the Rwandans, and they're doing the same today. This is where I insist. And now...
See? Like, this is literally... Hello, Dr. Roboculus. Off topics. Have I voted? And yes, I have. Nobody deserves an ethno-state. Well, I mean, like, the idea of the nation state, right, like in the 19th century romantic tradition, has literally been the cause of some of the worst acts of anti-Semitism against the Jewish people. Pogroms, right? And even in its most radical instantiation, you have the Holocaust, right? Where you have the Volksgemeinschaft and all of these things that come out of the revisionist history of the 19th century, right? Where it tries to create a pure history going back to ancient times or medieval times or whatever it might be. That is not the case. Literally, this is literally like going into like my area of expertise. Like all of the stuff that you hear from all of the all of the modern nation states where they say, oh, we have this like this unbroken chain of connection back to no, you don't. No, you don't. You barely have a chain of connection to 4 generations ago. There's no way that you have a chain going back 1,000 years. And that's just a fact. I mean, literally, Benedict Anderson goes into this in his book, and he doesn't even center Europe when he does that. He actually focuses on Latin America and shows how we were forced in a way by removing the Spaniards, right? The white, the American-born Europeans, right, had to create a whole national identity where they could now include themselves in without being Spanish, right? So that's where you get these weird like almost pseudo histories about the Aztecs and about the blah blah blah, right? As a way to sort of mask the lacunae that are actually left by romanticist nationalisms, right? And you see that in Germany, right, where it's like suddenly you have things like Faust, right? Things that occurred in the Middle Ages being seen as if you could actually like connect Faust or Die Meistersinges von Nürnberg to now. And it's like there's no connection between those two things. But I looked it up. It looks like the convicted terrorist supporter I was referring to was Ben Gvir. Yeah, I mean, the party that they started is literally Kahanist party, and the Kahanist party of the past, Kach, was declared an unlawful party because of it promoting terrorism, and was even outlawed in the United. It was even on the terrorist list in the United States up until like 2019 or something. Like, I kid you not. Like, there literally was a political party, and now they've made a new party, Otzma Yehudit, right? The Jewish Power Party, quote unquote, right? That's what it literally translates into. And that's the one that that Itamar Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and all of them are all part of, right? And that's literally a Kahanist party that's like as far right wing as can possibly be. Like, literally, like the shit that they have said, right? The only reason why in many cases they can even get away with it is because they literally say it in a language that very few people speak, right? Is just because they say it in Hebrew. And so therefore it doesn't typically leave the states, the state of Israel's media zone. So nation states of the current form were not just impossible. Unimaginable. Yeah, Benedict Anderson has done a lot of good work on the Philippines, yes. With at least partially centralized administrations. I would prefer to... So this is where my like Mexicanness comes out. I believe in the secrecy of each vote. And I believe that discussing what one voted for whom one voted for, goes against the spirit of the voting booth, right? That we should make a distinction to not say. But I will say one thing. It's I ask for that privilege of privacy. Not because I don't want to say something that would make people upset, right? Because obviously I'm not. Again, I live in one of the bluest parts of already a very blue place, so trust me. I mean, it is what it is, right? Like it's already, and here, like all of the local government stuff, it's all like people that grew up in this area, so and like those elections were the ones that people actually were very, very, very interested in, which I have never really seen before. Because everyone always goes for the top of the ticket. This time, interesting enough, most people were interested on the bottom of the ticket, which I had never really, like, that's not something I've ever seen. But anyway. Yeah, no, it's okay to ask. I'm just saying that I would like to invoke, right, my right to privacy, on that. But not for any, like, nefarious reason. Like, trust me. Remember, folks, never hit translate on a Hebrew tweet. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I don't have to, but like when I do read them, right, when people send stuff to me and I'm reading it and I'm just like, why would you even like there's that one guy, Adin, right? He's like a former IDF soldier, and he was like literally like said something along the lines of like, our prisons are so good that the Palestinians ask to be imprisoned, right? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I've never heard such bullshit. I'm not trying to shame your food choices. Yeah. Oh, and I got the thing about the photo wrong. It was a different terrorist and it was his lounge. Oh, okay. Yeah. But yeah, it's fine to ask. I have no problem, but I usually don't.
And compared to when there was the Holocaust, now we have a human rights framework that should prevent this. The Genocide Convention should prevent this. So this is one of the points. The second point, because which...
See, this is also like again, when people ask me the question, doesn't all of this prove that like all international law is for nothing? And in my view, no, it shows that we have decades upon decades of statutes, of rulings, of jurisprudence, etc., right? That shows that the world is saying never again, but the interest of a few specific imperialist countries, right? These things get to be committed still, right? And that even though by definition or by way of the UN Charter, all countries are supposed to defer to international law, right? The states that don't right now, that they're on the up and up, so to speak, right? Like they will be glad that that in the end, right, that they will be given a trial, right? Like a lot of people, I guess that's a weird way of wording it, but rather that like they will be put on trial at some point, right? One day they will be put on trial. And we already have all of this jurisprudence, all of these legal, all of this stuff already built to make sure that this never happens again. So that once those people are out of power, once those states no longer, and the world has progressed in such a way that we no longer have to, worry about the imperialist division of the world, et cetera, that the enforcement of international law, international humanitarian law, et cetera, can become the force for good in the world that it was intended to be, right? Is it perfect? No, but literally, it's one of the, historically speaking, one of these advances that it's just like the fact that it exists in the first place, goes back to the 19th century, right? With the St. Petersburg Protocol, the Hague, et cetera, Geneva Conventions, the provisions, or the protocols in 77, et cetera, right? Like all of these things that have been added on, but also all of the jurisprudence that has happened since then, right? That says instead of resolving things by war, we can resolve things through arbitration, through diplomacy, right? That people have rights, to where they have the right to return to places that they were displaced from, right? That there is some redress somewhere in the world, right? And even the concept of universal jurisdiction, right? That is a positive step in the right direction. The fact that anybody who is a war criminal can be arrested, is incumbent upon every country, right, to arrest them and try them, right, for their crimes, is a good thing, right? I understand that it is currently not applied evenly, but I mean that's every legal system, right? Unfortunately, but it is a step towards something that I think is more worthwhile overall, right? Like Mladic and the people that were brought to trial, for what happened in Bosnia, right? And what happened in Rwanda, etc., right? Like them being put on trial was important. And it was a good thing that we had international law there to help us determine, right, what was going on and why these people have to be brought to justice. But there will be the day that the people right now that hold the reins of power will no longer be holding them, right? And at that point, once they're put on trial, I think that's when people's minds will change, right? Right now there is impunity, and that is what stands in the face of all even historians who like myself, who have to read the human rights reports. It's sad, it's sad to see the United States just like essentially giving Israel a no limit credit card and just like do whatever you want. However, again, like was said earlier in chat, there will be a day that the Israeli high command and the the prime minister, etc., that they will at one point be brought before a court. And they have so blatantly, because of this impunity, they've become arrogant, right? They've become so arrogant that they think that they can get away with it. But even at that rate, right, we know that that will not end in them getting away with it, right? Because the peoples of the world in general understand that they need to be brought to justice. And I think that that's what's important too. That it does reflect a view among people around the world that there does need to be justice to be brought upon states and also their leaders, right? That needs to be informed by, different forms of jurisprudence, but also able to remain impartial, etc. All those things, right? But we also have to remember that just because right now, the ICC or the ICJ can only do this or that, right? The ICJ literally ruled that Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza was illegal and that it had to leave by September 2025. Now, of course, it cannot enforce it. It doesn't have a police body to go enforce it. But that means that every day after September 2025, right, they are in flagrant violation of that advisory opinion of the court, let alone whatever comes out in the genocide trial, right, which South Africa just submitted 750 pages of direct evidence, to which now the court is going to look it over, and Israel essentially has a year, or no, not a year, or is it a year? Something like that. Or I think it has, something like a year to respond in kind. But point being that even using the very limited recourse that we do have, it's it's a good thing that South Africa brought Israel to the International Court of Justice for a genocide trial, right? Because now all of that stuff that was said, that was done when they thought they could literally get away with it, even now, right? Now they have 750 more pages because they still think we're going to get away with it, right? All of that will at some point be important for us down the line. So I understand people's, response to that being, but there's no, but again, like I said, the ideals and the rules and the rights and privileges that are enshrined within all of these international documents and treaties are literally the things that are worth upholding, right? Like the distinction between civilians and combatants, right? The same thing where it says, you cannot attack, religious sites, you cannot, right? The more Israel racks up all of these things, the less that it can claim that it's, that it's doing it for self-defense, which, that's already out the window. But same thing with everything else, right? There is no way that they can claim that what they're doing in Gaza is for any of the things, right? Like, Israel cannot actually defend itself. It actually cannot, factually speaking. The only thing it can do legally under a trial is fuck off from Gaza. Like, literally stop the occupation, destroy the wall, and leave. That is its only legal recourse. So the more that it does that, the more it will be the case that later on, right, maybe not in the next year, but maybe in several years, there will be judgments brought down that will have a lasting effect. Unfortunately, I wish that I could give people a better answer. Like, trust me, I wish that I could help deliver the justice that is needed right now. Truly, I do. I wish that I could. Because I know in my work, in history, working with history, that very just like Francesca said, right? Nobody did anything. Well, actually, Georges Bensoussan wrote, nobody came to rescue the Jews from the concentration camps. The Red Army, as much praise as they're given by leftists in some level for liberating quote unquote Auschwitz, he is right in that no one fought to liberate the Jewish people. The only reason why Auschwitz was quote unquote liberated was because of all of the materiel that was there, because of all of the SS people that were there, etc., right? All, because you had all of these with all of these people, right? So you had all of this stuff that the Russians could then use after the fact. But they didn't go there because they were trying to save Jewish people. And that's actually where it's that's why when Francesca says nobody up until the end try to do anything to save the Jewish and the Roma and the Sinti, she's right. Literally, there were Deborah Lipstadt, who is pro-Israel. She's very much a Zionist, right? But two-state solution. But still, wrote a book that's called Beyond Belief, that's literally documenting how from 1933. You already had press from deep inside the United States, Cincinnati, Chicago, talking about what was going on in Germany and in the East, and like the discrimination that was happening. Well, obviously not in the East until 1939, but the point being that like the discrimination and all of the stuff that was happening in Germany, in the et cetera, and that people would read it, but it would always be on page 17, right? It was never a headline. And that, like, people knew what was going on, right? People knew what was going on. The extermination of peoples did not begin after Wannsee, because that was only the final solution. It wasn't the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, every other solution, right? And that's another thing to keep in mind, right? The only difference, and in fact, another important point I want to make here is there were people that followed international law and came to the aid of the Palestinians. However, they are reviled by the state of Israel and its imperialist backer, the United States, because it was Hezbollah, right, that on October 8th started firing at Israeli military installations, right? And then also the Yemen. They actually did try to do something. They actually were following international law on a higher level than Israel ever has. Like, literally, Hezbollah has only ever fought wars in a defensive way against the IDF. And literally in its decision to help defend, right, to help in the self-defense of Gaza, of the Palestinians, it fired only at military targets, right? Obviously, not every time it's going to be perfect, but still, they would aim at bases, at sonar equipment, blah, 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 all of that stuff. They were more discriminate than Israel has ever been. And yet, Hezbollah are the ones being called terrorists. Like, think about that. Like, there were countries that did actually live up to their required duties under international law. Another one would be South Africa. And every country since then that has added on to the case, right? The latest country was Bolivia. It's showing that facade that you cannot go against U.S. imperialist interest when it comes to its vassal state in the Middle East is becoming untenable for them to upkeep any longer. because it's doing something so heinous, so atrocious, that other countries of the global south, even its neighbor that's a global southern country, Mexico, has already also signed to intervene on South Africa's behalf to on the side of the Palestinians. I mean, that is unique. I mean, this is something that shows that that within the bounds of international law, you do have states that are doing this. You do have this. Nobody's doing that for the Israeli side. The only countries that have ever sided with Israel in this case are three: Germany, which provides 30% of arms exports to Israel, and the United States, which essentially provides us the rest, and then the UK, which provides like whatever little minor percentage they have left over. Literally, those are the three countries that are defending the state of Israel. Just those three. Yet every other country, including the Kingdom of Spain, right, in Europe, right, so even EU members are signing to intervene on the side of South Africa. Like, this would not have been possible. Like, honestly, if you would have told me before that the International Court of Justice would have ruled in favor of the Palestinians and said that the occupation of the occupied Palestinian territories was illegal, and given the state of Israel a specific time to withdraw and actually call it colonies, not settlements, colonies, I wouldn't have thought that a few years ago. I thought there is no way that the court would have voted in a vast majority saying also that the Palestinians have a right to armed resistance. I wouldn't have imagined that would have been a decision in an advisory opinion by the court. Because the last one they did was on the wall, right? The safety barrier, quote unquote. Right? So, same thing with the ICC. I mean, the fact that warrants were at least asked for, right? There was no way I ever thought Karim Khan was ever going to actually do it, because it seemed to me that he was going to finish his term and just leave it like that, oh, someone else can take care of it. But again, we're still waiting for the pre-trial chamber to hand them down, but still, we are seeing changes, but even if they seem very minuscule, they add up over time. And again, there will be a time when the perpetrators will be held responsible, and all of the evidence that they left behind, because they thought that they could get away with it, will haunt them forever. I mean, it's haunting the victims now, and well, it's like the book, like, if the one on Throne, right, the one that I am trying to get, right, the violence never leaves you, right? It's the same thing like with the ethnic cleansing of Mexicans from the United States. That violence is still there. It still lives on in the memory of all of the Mexican community. Because as soon as they have someone like Donald Trump saying, oh yes, I would let Greg Abbott do this, and oh, I would let, armed militiamen, patrol the border for themselves, and also to begin talking about mass deportations, that just proves that pain was always justified. That the entire time that we were saying it's going to happen again, and we were told there's no way, and the actual erasure of that, right? Same thing with the Palestinians, right? That there would be another Nakba, right? And then being told no, there's no way Israel would ever do that. We're seeing it right before our eyes. And so I think that's why it's important to consider all these things together. But Sorry, I kind of just went on a long rant, and I apologize for that. Well, yeah, but that's 750 pages of text plus 4,000 pages of exhibits and annexes, right? That's right. Remember that the ICJ almost already issued interim orders, right? Yeah. Almost nobody cared, right? It's true. No concentration camp was like, they didn't care that there were Jews there. What they wanted was the rifles, the artillery, the other stuff, so e.g. Evian Cry. Oh yeah. 29 or 28 countries come together. Only one country says that they, in fact, again, this actually is what sparked life into the Zionist movement, was the fact that because the United States and Britain had policies of not accepting people from Eastern Europe, mostly Jews, it left them with very few other places to go to in the world. And so they would literally illegally, right, smuggle themselves into Palestine. Thus, creating a situation where the population was, because the British didn't want more Jewish people on their soil, neither the Americans, right? Like, even EU, only reason Hezbollah even exists is because of another illegal Israeli war, right? Exactly, in 1982, and then became even more important in 2006. And this is not to condone what they do, because any single time that I talk about, like when I like my post on Rashid al-Haddad, al-Haddad, I have to put the disclaimer: I don't support any, whatever, blah blah blah. I'm not saying that I like what they do. I'm not saying that I think they should be none of that stuff. Anything that you want to infer from what I said, no. I'm just saying that in the context we're talking about, they adhered more to international law than the state of Israel did. And they invoked the right to help defend the Palestinians, which is their right under Article 51 of the UN Charter. That's all I was saying. Obviously, now more than ever, since 1994, we're quite dependent on the U.S. Oh, yeah, for sure. When it comes to weapons shipments, Germany is usually in the mix. Then we complain when the victims of our exports come and want to clean our toilets and deliver our Amazon packages. Well, even besides that, it's like, one thing I always want to kind of stress is, don't do what, what's her name? Kelly Osbourne did, right? Where she was like, where her response to Donald Trump was like, who's going to clean your toilet then? Right? I understand what you're saying, but that it quite isn't the response that I think people want to give, right? Because then it actually demeans the immigrants themselves, right? Because you're saying, oh yes, they do this. Even if they do that, right? We don't want to essentialize. And I'm not saying you are doing that, Cat Pig. I'm just saying that, like, it's not you don't want to equate, right? Or equivocate, right? And I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying that we shouldn't equivocate, right? Because, like, people will ask me, like, oh, do I do field work? And I'm like, I live in LA. Where are these fields to work in? Obviously not. But they still think that I drive, like, all the way up to Modesto, California, I guess, to go, I don't know, I just decide to, just get a ton of oranges for no reason. Of course, refugees are way overqualified. Oh yeah, no, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying you were being dismissive of any immigrants or refugees. I'm just saying in general, that, like, we don't want to equate, right, refugees and everything with being, just those jobs. Because, again, like you say, I've met people that, are undocumented, and in Mexico they were doctors, like physicians, And here they, have to work literally whatever job they can get. And I'm like, it's... My Syrian German garden neighbors are literally doctors and engineers. Yeah. Hi, powerful finger. Welcome in. And it continues, just like how the occupation has destroyed the state of Israel, right? Oh, yeah, for sure. It also chose to poison Americans who are not of Mexican descent, too. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. So let's see here. That's the rant. The rants are what we were here for. Yeah, no, I mean, I just always, think that like when people want to get rid of international law and everything, I'm just like, no. Like we don't want to do that, because it's not worth throwing it out, because there actually are some things in there that are worth keeping. Like, so wasn't World War II basically all the Allies waiting to be attacked before doing? My dad had a classmate who went to the U.S. with his wife, and they had to study again because their doctor's degree were not accepted. Yeah, no, that's true. America is very strange when it comes to people from other countries, especially global southern countries, or countries that kind of like skirt that divide, right? Like the former Yugoslavia, right? And essentially say, oh, well, we can't really trust that that's like a legitimate or thing like that to, equivalent to the United States. Because again, you have a physician, but because the schooling in the United States is different, a lot of times they will say, well, you would have to do this like examination, which you have to take classes for, to essentially get relicensed, but they're really expensive, right? And if you're undocumented, you can't really do that, right? Because you have to give them like your social security number and blah blah blah, and, so it's. I think one of them is now a psychologist. Oh, nice. My cousin is specializing in Germany and working as a radiologist. Oh, that's cool. That's really good. And the boycotts, yeah. Thank you so much, Sasha. Yes, it was made for me by Hellfire, who very thankfully made me this little avatar, so that way on when I want to stream and not necessarily be on screen, I can always have my little wiggler avatar, which it will be a Twitch emote very soon. I'm just waiting for it to be cleared as an emote. Time and history always find ways of repeating itself, yet people don't pay attention. Oh yeah, exactly, Metal. Yes, her ill. Wait, what? Oh, yeah, Kelly. Yeah, Kelly. Yeah. Well, with stuff like medicine, obviously some retraining is needed to different standard procedures. Yeah. I think the ballpark figure should be maybe... No, this would have essentially been like over 2 years. Very cute, wiggly chibi shacks. Exactly. Oh, that reminds me. Before... that reminds me that I did want to mention that I did put this in the Discord, but I want to mention it here on stream, that TJ requires some funds, right? Particularly to be able to get his car working again. So I'm going to post both here in the chats, so that way you can be able to donate if you would like to. If you can, please do. I highly encourage it. because again, we need to make sure that TJ can get his car working again, because as and remember that anything and everything helps. Thomas Jerome Newton? No, that's not Thomas Jerome Newton. It's another person. Someone who directly asked me to for help, for mutual aid, and said that asked me if I would please share it with my community, and so here I am. And by now we're trailing sending 2 trauma physicians together with the ambulance, not just one. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Okay, so let's see here. Ooh, okay. So because we're supposed to have a movie night tonight, our community night, I am going to, make sure. Did you see the clip where a Mexican Muslim girl was harassed by a German tourist? No, I have not seen that. You can, if you have a link, I would, you could put in the Discord. But right now we're going to raid the 27 Club and make sure to say hello to our friend of the VOD and of the stream. They will be talking about, he will be talking about politics stuff, of course. But in the server, we will be having our community night tonight, since it is Dia de los Muertos. And so make sure that if you want to go watch a movie, that you go there. So I will see you all very soon in Discord. Bye, everyone. Oh no, don't tell Rudyard.